I've worked alongside older adults for most of my career, in rehab centers, hospice units, and quiet homes where families try to hold on just a little longer. What I've learned is this: most of the damage we see after 70 doesn't come from sudden injuries. It comes from the slow erosion of the body and the quiet things people thought were keeping them healthy. We tend to trust routines, and routines make us feel safe. But after a certain age, even the most familiar habits, like walking every day, can backfire if they're not balanced with the right kind of support. Let me tell you about Frank. Frank was 73 when I first met him. Big-hearted man, former mail carrier. He prided himself on his morning walks, said they were his anchor since retirement. 2 miles every day, never missed. But when Frank slipped one morning in his own garage, he didn't have the strength to stop the fall. Nothing was broken, thankfully, but something cracked inside him. Confidence, mostly. He couldn't understand why it happened. "I walk every day," he told me. "I thought I was doing everything right. But here's the truth, and I say this gently: walking alone isn't enough. After 70, the body needs more than movement. It needs challenge. It needs resistance. It needs muscle. Most people don't know this, but after 70, we lose muscle mass faster than ever, a process called sarcopenia. And the muscles that protect us, our thighs, our arms, our back, start to fade if we don't actively train them. Frank had never lifted weights, never done resistance bands. "That's gym stuff," he laughed. "Not for guys like me." But strength after 70 isn't about building muscle to show. It's about holding yourself up when life tries to pull you down. We started small, 10 minutes every other day, seated rows with a resistance band, light squats while holding onto the kitchen sink. He even kept a small set of dumbbells by his recliner. A few weeks in, Frank told me, "I carried a full bag of groceries to the car, and I didn't even think about it." That's the power of strength. Not just the ability to lift, but the return of trust in your own body. Another common mistake: assuming that movement means balance. That's where Margaret's story comes in. Margaret was 76, elegant, thoughtful, the kind of woman who still sent birthday cards, handwritten. She walked every day, did her own shopping. But one winter afternoon, while reaching for a bowl on the top shelf, she lost her footing. No ice, no trip, just a slight shift in balance. And down she went. Margaret didn't just bruise her hip that day. She bruised her sense of safety, and it never fully came back, not until we started working on balance deliberately. Most people don't realize this, but walking forward in a straight line doesn't train the small muscles that help you react. The ones in your feet, ankles, hips, and core. And it definitely doesn't help you recover mid-fall or correct after a stumble. We started simple, standing on one leg while brushing her teeth, walking heel-to-toe down the hallway, side steps while doing dishes. She rolled her eyes at first, but kept at it. 3 weeks in, she said, "I turned to grab my purse and didn't wobble. I didn't even hold onto the chair." That's balance. Not just walking upright, but recovering with grace when life shifts under your feet. Then there's posture, a sneaky thief if I've ever seen one. Harold, a retired teacher, came into my support group with chronic lower back pain. Not from lifting, not from an injury, but from years of slowly folding forward without noticing. "Every time I look in the mirror," he said, "I feel like I'm shrinking." And he was not in size but in presence. When we neglect the core muscles, the deep ones in the abdomen and back, the spine has no support. And posture, that quiet indicator of vitality, begins to collapse inward. We taught Harold how to gently brace his core while seated. He practiced pelvic tilts in bed, stood against the wall for 30 seconds a day to retrain his alignment. It didn't fix everything, but it gave him something back, a bit of lift in his chest, a bit of light in his eyes. He stood taller, spoke stronger, not just physically, but emotionally. These are just a few of the mistakes I see every day. Not because people are careless, but because they've been told that staying active is enough. But staying active without intention is like walking without a destination. Keeps you moving, but not necessarily safe or strong. And the body after 70 is not something we keep going like a machine. It's something we care for, like a beloved home, one that's carried us through decades of storms and sunlight alike. Sometimes I think the greatest risk to our bodies after 70 isn't what we do too much of. It's what we stop doing altogether. Flexibility is one of the first quiet casualties, and most people don't realize it until something small, like tying a shoe or reaching into the back seat, becomes unexpectedly difficult. I remember Edna. She was 79, sharp as ever, but growing frustrated. "I don't feel old in my mind," she told me, "but my body feels like it's closing in on itself." What she meant was this: she couldn't move freely anymore. She'd always been active, walked her dog, did a bit of gardening, but she never stretched, never rotated her joints, never gave her body the variety it needed. And over time, her muscles shortened, her joints stiffened, her world got smaller. That's the price of limited motion, not just discomfort, but a slow erosion of independence. You stop doing certain things not because you don't want to, but because your body hesitates before you even try. With Edna, we began with gentle stretches, seated hamstring bends, shoulder circles, light yoga poses using the wall for support. She resisted at first. "I'm not graceful," she'd joke, "but grace isn't the point. Freedom is." And after a few weeks, she told me something simple but powerful. I turned my head in the car and didn't feel that pinch in my neck. I forgot what that felt like, to move and not brace myself. That's the beauty of flexibility. It returns quietly, just as it slipped away. Now, there's another trap I see all too often: repetition. Repetition feels safe, especially with movement. But past 70, doing the same motions every day can wear down the body more than build it up. Charles is a good example. He was 77 when his daughter brought him in. He walked 5 miles a day, every day. Had for years. He thought he was doing great, until his knees began to swell, and his hips ached every night. He didn't fall. He didn't trip. He simply wore out the same joints too many times without giving them the support they needed. We're taught that consistency is everything, but for the aging body, variety is just as vital. With Charles, we dialed back the mileage and added low-impact options. Water aerobics twice a week, a stationary bike for home, and seated strength moves that supported his knees without straining them. He was skeptical. "Feels like doing less," he said. But 3 weeks later, his pain eased. He still walked, just not as far, not as often, and never without giving his joints time to recover. We have to remember, more is not always better. Smarter is. And sometimes the smartest thing we can do is rest. But here comes mistake number 6, and it's a sneaky one. Thinking rest means stillness. Donna, age 81, once said something to me that I've never forgotten. "I'm either moving too much or not at all. I don't know how to be in the middle anymore." She'd spend days pushing herself, cleaning, walking, checking things off a list. Then she'd crash, spending the next 2 days on the couch, exhausted and sore. That rhythm? It's not sustainable. After 70, the body thrives on gentle consistency. Not pushing, not collapsing. Just steady, thoughtful care. With Donna, we built a routine around rhythm, not extremes. Morning movement, 5 minutes of light joint rotations. Afternoon, a walk but slower, shorter. Evening, a bit of stretching before bed. She began sleeping better, moving easier, and perhaps most importantly, she stopped fearing the crash. We talk so much about rest like it's a reward, something you earn after exertion. But for the aging body, rest is a form of motion. It's active recovery, the space for the body to breathe, not shut down. This brings me to the 7th, and maybe most emotional mistake I see in older adults. Not listening. Not listening to pain. Not listening to hesitation. Not listening to the quiet ways the body says, "I need help," not because people are careless, but because they're proud, or tired, or afraid of what slowing down might say about who they are. But here's what I tell every person I've worked with. Listening to your body isn't a weakness. It's a form of respect. You don't have to fix everything overnight. You just have to notice what's asking for your attention. And if you're still here, still listening, then you're already doing that. You're already honoring your body with awareness. So thank you for that. If you're still here, feel free to leave your thoughts below. I read each one with care, and so do others, quietly watching, wondering if they're the only ones feeling what they feel. There's a moment I'll never forget. A man named Walter, 75, retired electrician, sat across from me in a physical therapy room, his voice low and his eyes somewhere far away. He said, "I used to carry my grandson on my shoulders. Now I can barely lift my coat." And then he looked at me and added, almost like a confession, "I didn't notice it happening. It just slipped away." That's the hardest part of this work. Not the injuries, not even the grief. It's witnessing people lose parts of themselves without realizing it, until something ordinary becomes suddenly impossible. Walter wasn't weak. He was, in fact, strong, but strong in the old way. The I'll tough it out way. The just keep moving way. But what he didn't see coming, what many don't, was the slow erosion of capacity, one skip challenge at a time. This happens so often. The stairs you used to take without a second thought now feel steeper. The jar lid feels tighter. The floor feels further away. It's not dramatic. It's gradual. And that makes it dangerous. Because the body doesn't send alarms when strength fades. It simply begins to make other people necessary. That's what most seniors fear more than pain. Dependence. Not being able to take care of yourself. Not being able to do the small things that make a life feel whole. But here's what I try to remind every person, especially those feeling ashamed or frustrated. Losing ability isn't your fault, but ignoring it might be. We're not supposed to stay the same, but we are meant to stay engaged with our body, with its changes, with its signals. The clients I've seen make the most progress aren't the strongest. They're the most willing to be curious. To say, "I notice something feels different. What can I do about it?" That curiosity becomes power. And that power often begins in one overlooked place. The core. Most people think core strength means crunches or six-pack abs. But in older adults, it means something far more essential. Spinal stability, balance, breath, and ease. When your core weakens, and it will if you don't actively maintain it, posture declines. The shoulders round. The lower back begins to ache. Breathing becomes shallow. Movement becomes rigid. You stop lifting your chest. You stop standing tall. You stop taking up space. I remember working with Barbara, 82, a former school principal. Her mind was sharp as ever, but she hated the way she felt in her body. "I feel like I'm shrinking," she said. Not in height, in spirit. We talked about posture, about how her spine was collapsing forward, not from age but from inattention to support. We didn't start big. We started with breath. I asked her to sit tall and feel the back of her chair, to place one hand on her belly and one on her chest, to breathe into the lower hand, slowly, deeply, fully. Felt silly to her at first, but breath is the bridge back to awareness. Then we added seated core activations, pulling her navel gently toward her spine, wall presses to reawaken postural alignment, and eventually, some light resistance around her waist and lower back. Within weeks, something changed. Not just how she stood, but how she entered a room. She felt more herself again. That's what I wish more people knew. Posture isn't vanity. It's vitality. And when we give up on supporting the core, we don't just become more vulnerable to falls or back pain. We slowly disappear from the center of our own lives. The emotional toll of this is often under-discussed. I've heard people say things like, "I used to be the one people asked for help. Now I wait for someone to ask me if I need anything. I'm still me, but I don't feel like I live in the same body anymore." These are not small losses. They are quiet griefs, and they deserve more space in the conversation about aging. Because when someone over 70 loses strength, balance, or confidence in their body, they don't just lose ability. They often lose identity. That's why the small mistakes matter. Not because they cause damage overnight, but because they slowly reshape how a person sees themselves. So if you're starting to feel like things are slipping, if the body feels just a little less responsive, a little less yours, I want to say this gently but clearly, it's not too late to pay attention. And paying attention is not the same as panic. It's presence. It's care. It's a way to say, I still live here, and I want this body to feel like home again. One of the most difficult things to watch, and I've seen it more times than I can count, is the quiet shame that creeps in when an older adult begins to feel like they're no longer in charge of their own body. It doesn't come all at once. It builds slowly, like condensation on a window. A little struggle getting out of a chair, a pause before stepping into the shower, a hesitation at the curb before crossing the street. Moments that used to feel automatic now come with a flicker of doubt. For some, that doubt hardens into embarrassment. And then silence. I remember Earl, 80 years old, proud former firefighter. His daughter called me in after noticing he was avoiding certain outings. Church, neighborhood dinners, even his favorite cafe. It's not worth the trouble, he told me when I asked. But as we talked longer, the truth emerged. He didn't want anyone to see him struggle. Didn't want help with the car door. Didn't want to be the last one to get up from the booth. Didn't want to feel like a burden. This is what people outside the aging process often miss. It's not the physical decline that hurts most. It's the loss of autonomy, of dignity, of ease, and sometimes unintentionally the people around them make it worse. I've sat in family meetings where a son interrupts every sentence for his mother, where a well-meaning niece says, "She doesn't need to do that. I'll do it," where someone hovers just a little too closely, just a little too often. Comes from love, yes, but it also sends a subtle message. You can't. And after hearing that enough, whether in words or in glances, older adults begin to believe it. That's why I often advise families to wait 2 beats before stepping in. If grandpa struggles with the lid, give him a moment. If grandma takes a little longer at the steps, let her try. Be nearby but not in the way. Because what's at stake isn't just movement, it's self-worth. Another thing I've noticed is how often people try to hide their pain. You ask, "How's the shoulder feeling?" And they smile, "Oh, not bad." Meanwhile, they haven't lifted their arm above shoulder height in months. Why the silence? Sometimes it's pride. Sometimes it's fear of being told, "Well, that's just aging." And sometimes, more often than you'd think, it's the belief that nothing can help anymore. But that's not true. What helps isn't always fixing the problem. Sometimes it's just being heard in it. I worked with Ruth, 84, who lived alone after her husband passed. Her knees were swollen, her back ached, but she never said anything. Until one day, she looked at me and said, "I'm tired of pretending I'm fine." We didn't start with exercises. We started with conversation. And from that space of honesty, she began to trust her body again. Slowly, gently. When we treat older adults as fragile, we unknowingly train them to be. But when we treat them as capable with support, everything changes. That doesn't mean ignoring real risks. Of course not. Falls are serious. Pain is real. Limits matter. But too often, safety becomes a substitute for connection. We rush to install rails and simplify routines, but we forget to ask, what still brings you joy to do for yourself? Where do you want to feel strong again? These questions matter, because the body is never separate from the person. And when we stop asking how someone feels in their own body, we stop seeing the whole picture. I remember Marlene. She was 77, soft-spoken, always wore lavender sweaters. One day she told me, "I miss being able to carry my own laundry down the stairs, not because the laundry was important, but because doing it herself made her feel alive." So we built a plan, strengthened her grip, practiced with an empty basket, added resistance slowly. 3 months later, she carried that basket, full of towels, down the stairs without help. And when she reached the bottom, she wasn't proud because of the task. She was proud because she reclaimed a small, ordinary piece of herself. That's what this is really about. Not just preventing injury, but preserving identity. Not just managing decline, but maintaining meaning. Not just doing more, but choosing what matters most. When people ask me what's the most important thing to focus on after 70, they often expect a list. Stretch more, walk carefully, lift light weights, eat this, avoid that. But my answer after all these years is simpler. Stay in relationship with your body. Not as a project, not as a problem, not as something you need to fix, but as something you still live inside of. Place with history, a place that remembers every hug, every hill climbed, every child carried, every tear wiped away. You don't need to perform youth. You don't need to chase what you once were. You just need to ask day by day, what do I still want this body to be able to do? And then, meet that desire with kindness and small action. Some people want to keep walking to the mailbox. Some want to keep gardening. Some just want to reach the top shelf without wincing. And some just want to lie down and get back up again without fear. None of these are too small. In fact, they're everything. Because behind every movement we preserve is a moment of self-trust we protect. I think of all the older adults I've worked with, and I carry them with me even now, not as patients, not as cases, but as people who taught me what it means to grow old with awareness. They taught me that aging isn't a list of limitations. It's a new kind of conversation between you and your body, and the more you listen, the more your body responds. Even at 70, even at 80, even at 90, because here's the gentle truth. Your body hasn't given up on you. It's just waiting for you to pay attention again, to stretch even slightly, to strengthen even gently, to balance even imperfectly, to breathe even slowly. And when you do, you start to come back to yourself. Not the younger self you used to be, but the deeper self, the one that's still here, still capable, still curious, still home. So wherever you are in this journey, whatever small thing you noticed slipping, whatever quiet ache you haven't spoken aloud, know this, you're not too late, and you're not alone. If this kind of quiet reflection feels helpful to you, you're welcome to come back anytime. I'll be here,